Hi, my name is Stephen. I'm from Just Turnings. I get a lot of questions and messages sent to me about finishing, sanding and polishing, and my techniques and everything like that. So I thought today I'd just do a quick video running through my techniques and what I use to get the what I believe is my best finish possible. So in front of me is basically what I use. So first of all, obviously you need something to sand and finish. Today I'll be doing this cap. So it's basically turned, but not sanded at all. So it'll go on the lathe soon. It'll be the cap to this pen. So you can see this one's already done, and you can see it's got quite a nice shine to it already. So first thing basically is sanding paper. I use the Mirka Arbanet. I use 400, 600, 800 and 1000 grit. I cut them up into little rectangle squares like this. I'll basically use one set of these per pen. So a pen for me is three or five pieces, and then I throw it out and get a new one. They probably do last longer than that, but that works for me. I will then use, so after it's sanded to 1000, I use just some regular wet and dry paper in 2000, 3000 and 5000. So just nothing special there. I cut them up into very tiny little squares, which I'll then use. Basically use one set of this per part, and then they go in the bin. Again, they probably last longer, but sandpaper is cheap. I will also, when I'm doing my initial sanding, I'll use a nice square offcut, and for the first grit I will use this as a guide to make sure I'm getting a nice flat even surface without any pits or anything like that. And then my next thing is my polish. So I use Stellar Shine, which you can get from Steve's Woodcraft here in Australia. So basically it has 5 different polishes. Work your way through from 1 to 5. Very quick, doesn't take very long. To apply the polish, I use makeup pad removers, makeup pads. So they're 100% cotton, perfect sort of size for working on pens, and very cost effective. So I buy this home brand pack from Woolies here in Australia. It's $1 per pack. You get about 80, I think it is, in the pack, so it'll last a reasonable amount. And then I'll also use some methylated spirits to sort of just clean the blanket in different places. Okay, I'll get it all set up over on the lathe and we'll give it a go. Okay, so here we are over at the lathe. I've got the piece mounted, so ready to go. Basically, first thing I'm going to do is sand it, get the shape, and finish. I'll make it all smooth and get this all correct. And then I'll sort of like move and focus on the proper sanding. So I'll get that started and I'll come back in a second. Okay, so I've sanded the end here, got the shape I like, got rid of any of the tool marks, so now I'll just work on the top here. So the way I do it is I use a small offcut, which I know has got a nice flat surface on it, to wrap my Arbanet around it. So I wet sand, so it's been dipped in a little container of water, and then I just sort of basically very gently just rubbing it back and across here. This makes, by having the bit of acrylic there, just make sure that I'm getting a nice flat even surface on the blank, on the material, and that way there's no tiny little sort of pitfalls that and bumps and stuff that you might sort of get if you were just sort of holding it with your fingers, which is a very uneven sort of surface. So I'll just do this for the first grit, and then basically once you've got that done, then you can just sort of sand without it. So depending on how good your work with your tool was, depends on how long this will take. So I'll use this sort of method anytime I'm going for a straight sort of edge. If I've got something that's sort of curved, like a section or something like that, then I won't use the bit of acrylic, because obviously that won't work. Important thing is not to press too hard. You don't want to make really, really deep scratches with it. Sort of just need to let sandpaper and the lathe do all the work by letting it sort of spin, and you don't need to be applying a lot of pressure. Sort of hard to convey how much pressure, but yeah, sort of just needs to be fairly light. So I just run my finger backwards and forwards. I can feel now that it's nice and smooth, got out all those tool marks and everything. So I'll just clean off it, sandpaper, and then just give it another really quick go. Right. I start with 400 grit. I find that works best for me. It'll get out the tool marks reasonably quickly. If you start too low, sort of like 220, 320 or something like that, especially in this aluminite material that I mostly work with, it can put in some very big scratches or deep scratches that can be very hard and time consuming to remove, and I don't see there's any benefit to it. I would only really ever use 320 maybe if I had a really, really rough surface, if I did a really bad job with the turning. Okay, and then I just need to put a tiny little bevel on the edge here. So just clean it a little bit. And then, so it's a nice straight sort of smooth surface. So once that's done, basically I go backwards and forwards on the end bit. This helps remove any sort of circular patterns in there, and then the same thing backwards and forwards here. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time doing this, but it'll really help get the sort of circular marks out and make the next grip easier for you. Give it a quick clean paper towel, and then on to the next grip. So I basically do the exact same thing, 600, 800 and 1000, and then I'll come back to you in a second. Okay, so I've got it sanded now to 1000 grit. So with the polish I'm using, sanding to 1000 grit is actually probably enough. I like to go a little bit overboard and sand a little bit further, so I'll really quickly do it with 2000, 3000 and 5000 grit. I don't spend a whole lot of time on it, so I sort of just get through it fairly quickly. I just sort of feel it gives the polish just a little bit extra room to sort of work with, and just sort of helps it go a little bit better. But this sort of step definitely probably isn't necessary. So essentially exact same thing. So just wet sandpaper, it's wet and dry, backwards and forwards, just gently, then on the end. And stop it, and then again backwards and forwards, just to remove any of the circular lines, and then really focus on the end, because that sort of really needs a bit more extra work on these sort of ones. So quick clean, and then just do that exact same process for all three grits. So like I said, really not spending much time on this step. It's just sort of to help the polish get what it needs done. Whether it actually makes much of a difference, I'm not really sure, but I do it anyway. It's not a big investment in time. So the wet look here gives you sort of a bit of a preview now of what it'll look like when it's polished. And last one is the 5000. I like to just take off this very corner here with the 5000 as well. Okay, and then again backwards and forwards, just remove the circular lines and break it up a bit. end. So next step will be to do the polish. So I'll get all set up for that and I'll come back in a second. Okay, so all set up. So first thing gonna do is just give us a quick clean. So I've just basically soaked one of these pads in some methylated spirits and basically just give it a quick clean backwards and forwards, just get any of the dust off it, just to give us a nice sort of clean surface to start with. And then just need to basically wait for that to dry. So in terms of speeds, I didn't mention when I was sanding, basically I do all my sanding at 750 RPMs, basically only because it's a nice speed and my lathe has a preset for it, so that's what works for me. So I'll apply the first step, so step 1 at 750. So you only need a tiny bit, so I actually do 2 applications. So I'll put 2 little dots on my paper. You really don't need much of this stuff at all. A bottle of this goes a long way. So first one, so I just sort of apply it, sort of work it in. Gives it a nice base. You can see it's quite shiny already. And then turn it around and I crank the speed up now. So I go up to about 2,500. Again, so that's what my lathe has a preset for, so it's nice and easy for me to go up and down. So I just sort of work it in, not applying much pressure at all, just enough to sort of buff it in. So when you apply it, you sort of touch it on where it's on the pad, and then you move to a clear spot to sort of buff it and rub it in. First one. So step 1 is quite a sort of very thin liquid, the first one, so just have to be careful you're not putting too much on. So I do a quick wipe with the metho. So step 2, I turn the lathe speed back down to 750. So again, you don't need very much, just a tiny little dab. Reason I turn it back down for this step is that I find that if it's running too fast, it tends to grab the pad and wrap it all around it, make a giant mess. So basically I just gently rub it in and then crank the speed back up. So then I turn it around to a clean part and buff. So these pads you can use both sides, so I'll turn this one over now, get clean. Now I've turned the lathe up a bit, I got up to about 3,000. And again apply a small dab, and I'll do this for the last 3 pastes. So you don't need to spend a whole lot of time on each one, just backwards and forwards. You can sort of see by looking at the angle with the lighting, depending on the lighting in your shop, you can sort of see the polish being worked in and the lines being removed. Sometimes you'll see a bit of a black sort of thing on the pads, it's okay. Just quick wipe in between applications. So I like to put it on and then I sort of put it together like that, just to spread it out a little bit. The tops, you really need quite a bit of extra pressure and force on that top to really get it shiny, just because of the way the resin's poured. It won't go as shiny as the other edges. Okay, and last one, step 5. So step 5 is very thin, so just be careful when you're tipping it out. You don't need to squeeze it quite as much as the other ones, otherwise it'll go everywhere in the waste heaps. So again, it's exactly the same thing. So you can really see this one working in the angles of the light. Backwards and forwards a bit, just quickly run a bit more over it. And then we're done. So all nice and polished. So hopefully you can see that fairly well. So it gives a really nice sort of polish with not too much work. Get a nice sort of mirror finish, feels nice and smooth. I don't like to use buffing wheels. I know you can get a very good finish on buffing wheels, but not really my thing. And I find it's a bit too much hassle having to set up different attachments and sort of things to do that. I know you can do it all in batches, but yeah, not a fan. So yeah, this is my method of getting a nice finish. Obviously there's lots of different products on the market that you can use. I've been using this Stellar Shine stuff for since it was launched. So these bowls were provided to me from Sam at Steve's Woodcraft. So big thanks to her for providing it for me. I usually just use it in tiny little sort of bottles that I bought and had pre-filled. So I just got her to provide some nice fancy ones for me with the logos and everything on it, so you guys can see it. So big thanks to Sam. So I'll put a link in the description of where you can get this from. If you have any questions at all or anything you want to ask, please feel free to let me know. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you again soon.